Well, I suppose one of the things that struck me, I mean, I think across, all you were all talking about kind of the need for solidarity, the need for activism, the need for kind of respect, dignity, but also this kind of idea of the constant challenge of trying to work, trying to create change. And I was just trying to think about what the role is for academics in that kind of process, because there can be a kind of tension between the kind of academic and activist. And I was thinking very much when Brenda was talking about strategy and working with government, and I suppose what type of evidence persuades government to make any kind of changes in their policy. So that would be my first question.
It is a good question, because often we struggle in this space. Governments are very much driven by data, and the LGBTI community data is scarce and hard to find. We don't know how many people are LGBTI. We don't know how many people are trans and gender diverse. And therefore, a lot of what we do is based on stories rather than the facts that we would like. One of the great things in the last few years, from my perspective, has been the government funding for trans and gender diverse clinics. So $6 million was allocated over 4 years to improve the services at Royal Children's Gender Clinic. And then a year later, $6.4 million for services for Monash Gender Clinic for adults. We didn't have facts around how many people are gender diverse, etc. But we did have waiting lists for those clinics. We did have the risk factors that are contributing to those that are waiting on those waiting lists. It is the most vulnerable time once you get a referral to a specialist and then waiting for something to happen. We had people self-medicating, we had people at suicide risk, we had people with increased levels of anxiety and depression. And we were able to use that information to build a case to provide the funding to reduce the waiting lists. And I guess what's interesting now is the waiting lists came down, and now the waiting lists have gone back up because there are so many more people who are exploring what gender identity means for them and how that might be addressed. So, Catherine, it is an ongoing battle. We've been fortunate that Archers have done some great research over many years with a number of different projects. In the trans community, there's been quite a bit that's been done out of Curtin University and out of WA. And it's a matter of, I guess, prioritising, getting more data, undertaking more research to build the business cases for more assistance. And certainly, we're fortunate the Labor government listens more than some other governments have done.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any responses? No.
When the data, I just wanted to say, I used to work at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. That's a little secret for you. But yeah, anyway, one of the things I'm really passionate about, and so I always want to raise it, is that around suicide statistics. So I did talk about in my talk, and we just don't ask. We don't ask the gender identifying. We ask gender like male and female, but we don't ask LGBTI when people suicide, and it's often well known. It only gets recorded if it's a cause, which is extremely problematic. Because how is it a cause? How do we quantify that? So I just want to add that. It's something I'm very passionate about for anyone who ever wants to join me in that legal campaign. But yeah, I think it's something we've got to do around the coroners. It's really important, because how do we actually say, like Lifeline got $20 million last year to increase support around suicide. I mean, it's very hard to get money to LGBTI communities because they just say the main issue is men. Men are the main people who suicide. But who are those men? I certainly know a lot of them statistically when you break it down at Aboriginal, but what else do we know about those men? And I think unless we ask the questions, unfortunately we don't get the money.
So can I just add as well? One of our challenges is, because of the stigma and discrimination that most LGBTI have experienced, many still experiencing, They don't like to out themselves. So when ABS does the census, when we do other data collection, the majority of LGBTI people won't identify themselves. We know the majority of LGBTI people are not comfortable to come out at work. We know that the majority of people who are accessing aged care services don't want to identify they're LGBTI because they think they're going to get an inferior service if they do so. That is a fundamental barrier to getting data, to having people comfortable to be themselves and to complete data collection, being honest, being able to be open and honest. It's a huge issue.
I had a question that's kind of directed to the whole panel, but in particular, Brenda, you were talking about how this Victorian government has been, or the Victorian Labor government has been especially, I guess, integral to a lot of the developments that we've seen. Something I'm wondering is when we have a kind of polarity in this government, so for instance, on the LGBTI front, they're particularly progressive, they're leading in terms of state and territory governments, but at the same time, we're seeing new youth prisons being built, we're seeing disproportionate and increasing rates of Aboriginal women being incarcerated, and we're seeing the violation of like sacred country, as in the case of the Djab Wurrung heritage site. How can we go about taking these opportunities that the government is giving us and enable this progress on the LGBTI front and celebrate that progress without allowing that to be something that, I guess, erases criticism of the government on other fronts?
It's an ongoing battle. And governments are faced with lots of priorities. And we experience that in trying to get our legislation through and having to join in with all the other communities and organisations and departments that want legislation progressed as well. I think the message that Joe talked about in terms of how we do that solidarity and how we be there for everyone rather than just ourselves. It's an issue. I've spoken at overseas conferences in the last 2 or 3 years, and it embarrasses me to be talking about what we want in Australia when I engage with people on LGBTI rights in other countries. And Nur referenced in terms of how difficult it is in just so many countries. It's a reminder. I was at a conference in Wellington just recently, the global LGBTI conference. A trans woman from Papua New Guinea was there and spoke to us with male clothes on and said, "This is how I have to dress at home. I have no choice. I can't be myself." And it just is a stark reminder of the disparity. And you're talking about the disparity with different communities. I think what we've not done well enough is hone in particularly on some of those intersections. And I think that there's a lot more that community groups could be doing to work on intersections. Far too much is happening in silos, and therefore we don't pick up on some of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, some of the disability issues, some of the multi-faith and multicultural issues and so on. And I think when I talk about the LGBTI strategy, all of us are multifaceted. We're not, so from my point of view, I'm not defined by being LGBTI. Most of us aren't. And somehow we need to be working towards a holistic response to everything, which I think starts to talk to what we're talking about. So my dream would be that we do away with individual subgroup strategies, and we have a Namana where we work to, where we're treating people with dignity and respect, and there is equality and equity for all. And I would love this government to be working away from equality is not negotiable to equity. I see equity as a more powerful version of what we're trying to achieve.
I'm not sure I can add any more to that, to be honest. Just in terms of criminal processing systems, they are so broken. We really, really have so much work to do. And I think that now is the crucial time to be continuing the activist work, trying to get in, trying to make sure that we've got our voices in amongst all of the politics so they understand what the issues are, how the people that are incarcerated can be protected. Because at this point in time, there's not really, I don't think there's going to be a point where the government wakes up and says, you know what, let's dismantle the police. That sounds like a great thing to do, as much as that would be my dream. It's not going to happen. We really need to be able to work with those systems to make them better from the inside out. And if we can't do that, they're going to continue to do really shit things. That's probably my summary.
I guess you know what I think about this, but I think that it's really important. I'm not part of government. I was an Australian public servant for enough period of time. And I think my role is, I think you must never become co-opted by government and always remain critical of government. I work for a not-for-profit and I'm always trying to, and I'm a charity and I've got certain legal legislations, but one of the things I don't have is I have to abide by Australian law, but that's very broad-reaching. And I think we must always keep being critical and not being co-opted and always looking, it's ongoing. And although I have think this government is doing a great thing, it is certainly not doing a great thing with the sacred trees. There's a number of things we could name around forestry and other issues, certainly. And I think for me, my leverage point is that, like, at some point, if I want to, it is that point about we are everywhere and just breaking down that idea that these things are not LGBTI issues. How are the trees around songlines not an LGBTI issue? Like, that is almost my question back to you, really. And I think that's the question we should have with each other, is where are they not? And I think that gets us thinking. Oh, I'm sorry.
Any? Yep. Hello, thanks for the, oh, is this on? Hello? Okay, it is, cool. Thanks for the panel. Your talks were really inspiring and you're doing such great work. I had a question, it's kind of jumping off what we were just talking about, but how do you balance in your research and activism being critical of systems and also working with systems? And do you think there's a risk that you can be so critical that the systems won't work with you? Yeah, can you comment on that?
You want to go with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's a very difficult space to be. I've learned that, particularly over the last 3 years, I run a senior manager's qualifying program that's aligned with a university degree at the University of Tasmania. And I do that with Tasmania Police, the Victoria Police. And there are days where I go into the classroom with these folks and something like hares and hyenas happens and everyone in that room is just as angry and peeved as I am. So I know that there are good people in those organisations and they're good thinkers and they're going to do good work. But it just takes such a long time to see the machinations of change happen. And we're seeing that very, very slowly, particularly in criminal processing organisations, where they are based on archaic ideas in the first instance. But I think, yeah, being a critical scholar is absolutely central to who I am. I cannot give that away. I always stand up front and I will tell the officers that I teach and everyone I engage with, this is my politics, this is where I stand. I'll always challenge things that you say because it's important for you to hear the other ways of doing and thinking. And there are days where I go home and I just feel like my soul has been destroyed. But I don't know, I think it's still really important work and you have to have self-care there. You need to be able to switch off. You need to have those things in your life that make you happy, where you can actually tune out away from all that you're doing in your academic work or in the activist stuff, because you will burn out and destroy yourself at the end of the tunnel at some point. That can be really difficult to manage, especially when, you know, it's inherently bound together.
I was going to add, from my point of view, I am not aligned with any political party. I've never been a member of a political party, and it's been important for me to be able to work with politicians rather than just Labour. And I value that. I value that I can work with both sides, or all sides. But the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years is slow, it is relentless, it does need strategy, and it does need patience. And that can be frustrating. And I get frustrated a little bit today with young people coming along thinking that things should be fixed straight away. It just doesn't happen that way with politics, unfortunately. It is a long, slow, often a grind. And we've had that with birth certificate reform. To have had to wait another 3 years has been particularly damaging for the community. To listen to what we did in the upper house was damaging for the community as well. But turning your back on it doesn't get there. And somehow we've got to continue to find ways to engage and push our case. We learned through the marriage equality thing that we can rely on our allies. That movement got the traction it did because it wasn't just LGBTI people, it was working with the community, it was tapping into allies. And I think we can learn to do that in a better way than we have in the past, and hopefully that's the start of doing so.
I mean, I wonder if there's any law students here who studied charity law. Has anyone done that? Has any no law students who studied charity law? Well, an example is I work for a charity, and this is a really interesting part of law, is that it's a lot of this big campaigns, and this Liberal government wanted to stop the ability for people who worked in organisations to speak out against politics. If you follow, it's a really actually essential issue when you talk about working with the systems. This would have created a huge barrier for so many of us. It actually tried to stop us from advocating around policies, and there was a famous case called Aid Watch that actually changed charity law in Australia, which means that you can get up and you can make comments as long as they're a charitable purpose and connected to your charitable purpose. So I'm very aware of the systems. Before I spoke today, I read the charity law stuff, because I am, I cannot put my charity, Switchboard Victoria, in jeopardy by the things that I say. But I believe there is nothing I've said today that has put me in jeopardy. I actually think, or put any of us in jeopardy, is we can be a lot more revolutionary than we think. Yeah. And that's what I think about the systems and some of the things that people have said today, is that I think sometimes, the Foucault panopticon is sorry, you're at university, you know what I'm talking about. But, I think we police ourselves very quickly and are being a lot more conservative than we and there's this old adage that says the best reformist is a revolutionary. But I'll just leave it there.
Is there any more questions? Oh yeah, sorry.
Just wonder if the panelists, thanks for your talks, if you can maybe comment on what do you expect people to be doing on IDAHOBIT Day, because it is a day to think about LGBTI oppression and needs, but if you were to ask people in your own respective spaces, what is it that you'd be expecting us to do on that day?
I think I'll just respond by saying that we're privileged by being in a place like here. In some countries, just by attending a talk like this, we will all be in prison, in jail. And I think the 17th of May is it's a day to raise awareness of some of the struggles that LGBTIQ+ individuals go through globally. So although we are local here, I think we should have a global gaze. We should think of our LGBTI. Indonesia is very close to us. And I do a lot of work with some organizations that are just gagged. So we have to, with every privilege comes a sense of responsibility. We have to have that sense of responsibility for our LGBTIQ+ siblings on a global scale.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't think I'm just going to say yes. I think we have to remember what the I is in IDAHOBIT, which is internationalism, It's a really important part. But I also think that doesn't diminish talking about local issues. I mean, tomorrow night I'm spending IDAHOBIT going to a Switchboard fundraiser, because guess what? 0.07% of government and philanthropic funds go towards charities that are LGBTI focused in Australia. 0.07%. So I'm going to a fundraiser for our organisation. So that's something I'm going to do, and they're the things that I have to straddle, I think.
Yes, I'm tomorrow going to a flag raising with one of the councils, and I'm speaking at a couple of other forums. I think we should be reflecting on where we're at worldwide. IDAHOBIT is a worldwide day, and we are fortunate to be in Australia. And what are we doing? What am I doing to try and recognise the battle that so many others have around the world? I think is a good way to do it. We also encourage aged care providers and others to celebrate the day. We think it's a good way to send a subtle message that you are LGBTI inclusive. So rainbow cakes, rainbow umbrellas, rainbow shoelaces, rainbow anything and everything. Often people don't want to out themselves. It is important to them to see that it's safe to do and it is being recognised. So I think there's a role for organisations to be celebrating IDAHOBIT, but I think also reflecting on what more we could be doing.
I guess I have a different viewpoint, because I try and think of every day as Transgender Remembrance Day, every day as IDAHOBIT Day, every day as Bisexuality Visibility Day, because I really don't think there should be a day where we're not talking about it. I think silence is what leads to the deaths of people that are engaged in all of the things that we're involved in. And we need to be constantly the voice in the room, even if it's just once a day, where if someone says something, you can contribute what the issues are for trans and gender diverse people or other lesbian and gay people, bisexual people. Be that voice in the room and make sure that the awareness around those issues is raised. It's in some way every single day, and I think that would be just a fantastic thing to do. And then it becomes a very small dedicated thing that you do on a daily basis, and other people can hopefully learn from that and model that behaviour too. Because I really think that the silence is what we need to stop, and we just need to be able to keep those voices raised and keep the issues in the faces of those people that can make change.
Thank you. Okay. Where's the other parent? Thanks.
How can you hear me? My social media feed is filled with the Alabama abortion ban, and it's scary, because you wonder if those kind of U.S. policies will be, or the sort of system in which those regressive laws occurred there, would it happen here? And do you guys watch out for that? What are your thoughts on it? And does it affect, I guess, Australian policies at all?
I can probably start with that one. Yes, it can happen here. Yes, it does happen here. Yes, we need to be constantly aware of when things like that come up and the impact that it's going to have on the community. I think it's really hard to keep your ear to the ground constantly to listen to what is going on with legislative change. It can be extremely exhausting. I'm part of a group in Tasmania called Equality Tasmania, which is headed up by Rodney Croon, and we really are at the forefront of legislative change in a whole range of different areas. And some of the stuff that you hear, because we've raised a particular bill and sent it to the Parliament, is just truly astounding. And so it doesn't surprise me that something like what's happening in Alabama right now is actually happening. And I do think that we need to be wary of moving into those spaces in Australia. Because as much as it pains me to say it, Australian politicians do look to the US as a sort of capitalist icon and a way of doing things in a way which is seriously disturbing around criminal processing systems. And again, I would always say we need to disrupt that stuff and make sure that it doesn't happen. The move towards privatisation alone in Australia is very, very distressing. So yes, it can happen here. It's quite likely to happen here down the track. I sincerely hope it doesn't. And that at the moment, you know, Dee Dee Herman talks about politically conservative peaks and troughs. I hope we're at a peak and we're going to go to a trough soon where we do respect people in some form or another, and those things don't happen, but I do worry that that is a possibility.
I've been particularly disturbed in the last, I guess, 5, maybe a bit longer years, in terms of how much influence there has been in Australia from American politics. We've seen quite a swing to the right in, I guess, around the world. It is happening here. It is often being funded by religious organisations in the States, and an expectation that with their funding comes their form of politics. And I think abortion rights, trans and gender diverse rights, and other things that are becoming so divisive in the United States, we run the risk of them getting a voice here and doing damage here as well. And I find it alarming, and unfortunately money does seem to have an influence, and we are seeing that through the Australian Christian lobby and through other organisations, and it's disturbing and it's worrying.
I think we have, you know, I always think, when I think about abortion, I grew up in Queensland. I mean, they just decriminalised it, for starters. But the abortion ban in, what I think about it is that adage is just, you can just put it to trans issues, like our bodies, our lives, our right to decide. Like, that's what abortion is all about. And that's what being trans is all about. Our bodies, our lives, our right to decide. So I think it's just, what, you know, that's, so, and I have absolute solidarity for any woman who wants to exercise her right to choose. And you know, I think the exemptions around that we made in Victoria around not allowing people to stand outside abortion clinics, they had a parameter distance, was excellent reform. But I think one thing we can think about Alabama is that, you know, the historians talk about the myth of the forever present. There is this idea that, you know, the way things are now is the way they've always been, but also within the forever present is the idea that things forever get progressive, and that's just absolute garbage. Like, things don't always get better. They only get better because we fight tooth and nail with them and put our bodies and our lives against the system to change them. They certainly don't happen by the goodwill of administrations. They happen there because we are in those administrations and we're doing the hard work. And the social justice movements, ultimately, as well, driving the people who are in those systems to make those changes or to give them the power to make those changes. So I think it's just like, never fool ourselves that things will just get better because of time. Because history, that has never happened. And that's what history has to teach us.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're almost at time, so does anyone have a final question? No? Okay. All right, well, I would like to thank our 4 wonderful speakers today, and thank you for being such an attentive audience and for your insightful questions. I did have to make an announcement. Someone came in and said that there is, let me see, what's the announcement? A Pride after party is happening with tunes and social sport for anyone who would like to go along at the O. Beckett Square behind Building 80. And they're going on until, I think 8, she said. So if you want to go there, then please do head over to Building 80. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to our speakers.